Prenatal period, you can oftentimes find yourself asking the question, is this safe? Especially when it comes to different medications. And so this video is to empower you on some of the research that is coming out on acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol, and autism spectrum disorder, and also to empower you and equip you to make wise choices for your health and for your family's health. So, what is the research saying? Well, they did a systematic review and they found that in 70,000 moms that there was a 20% increase in borderline or clinical neurodevelopmental symptoms like autism spectrum or ADHD among the children who were exposed to acetaminophen. Another study that was done in 2020 looked at 1,000 umbilical cord blood samples and found that the ones that had a higher amount of acetaminophen had 3 times higher rate of autism. Now, that's interesting information and information that we should be equipped with, especially as moms when making healthcare choices for ourselves and for our families. And so really they're showing that there is a correlation between prenatal acetaminophen exposure and autism spectrum disorder. Now, obviously, that research, there are limitations to that research, and there's definitely more research that needs to be done. Some of the limitations are being able to prove the cause and effect relationship. Some of it is that moms reported retrospectively, which is essentially after the fact. So, is there variability in the accuracy, etc.? And so there are other things to look at, but really at the core of this, it's saying let's evaluate how we approach different things and how we could potentially take other drug-free options as a first alternative, especially in our health. The healthcare system is designed around this concept that we have pill or a medication for everything, but are we giving ourselves tools to be able to utilize other alternatives first before then going to medication? And so it's not to provide, this video is not here to guilt anyone, or provide any shame from taking acetaminophen or Tylenol during pregnancy, but to help equip and build your toolbox on other options that can be a first alternative before going to medication. So, especially during the prenatal period, one of the main reasons we would take Tylenol would be physical discomfort, could be for headaches, could also be for fevers. And especially when we talk about physical discomfort as a prenatal chiropractor, it's one of the main things we specialize is increasing or keeping mom as comfortable as possible for as long as possible by putting everything in proper alignment and balancing mom's body, and also doing some gentle muscle releases and ligament releases to help provide to allow the body to expand and to grow with more ease versus discomfort. And then especially headaches, especially when there's a lot of hormone fluctuations, that can be common. And so chiropractic care does a great job at really supporting mom with headaches. And so really, what are some other options? And so I think that when we look at our healthcare system, we really want to understand, are we going to medications as our first alternative? Or are we looking and saying, okay, what are some other things that we can do beforehand? When we're looking at autism spectrum, especially, we know that autism spectrum is not just genetic. We know that there are other factors, especially with the increase we're seeing in the prevalence and the rate of diagnoses of autism spectrum. What is going on? And there's a lot of research still to be done. There's research on the role that inflammation has. There's research on the role that potentially, birth trauma or birth interventions can have, environmental exposure for different things, and how obviously the environment plays a role. And then obviously the genetic correlation, but we're really trying to figure out what is going on. And so one of the things we talk about when we talk about infant stress, we talk about where would that potentially come from? And we see it as this perfect storm, the storm of environmental or toxic exposure. And so, what's happening in the environment? And our body does have a detox system, and our body does have an immune system, and we're supposed to flush things out. But what role is that potentially having? And this is the bucket that the acetaminophen would fit into. What role is this potentially having? Obviously, we need to have more research, but research is indicating there's a correlation. And let us continue to explore that with research so we can find the necessary answers that we need to understand how this environmental bucket can be playing a role and why we're seeing an increase in prevalence. Other thing we look at is we look at birth interventions or birth trauma. Physical trauma is one of the main forms of stress we can have in our body. And for an infant, the main form of physical trauma they've had thus far is the birthing process. And ultimately, the goal of the birthing process is to have a happy, healthy baby. But how are we potentially adding unnecessary interventions that are causing an additional or a greater amount of physical trauma in baby? And so that's when we look at different things like forceps or vacuum or C-sections, etc. Not that they're inherently bad, especially when used to as a last-ditch effort or in an emergency C-section or for an emergency delivery, etc. Not that those are inherently bad, but they definitely are increasing the amount of physical tension in baby. And so what kind of role is that playing? And especially as a pediatric chiropractor, when we can assess those things, one of the things that we look at is babies are pulled out by their head and their neck. Through C-section, through vaginal delivery, they're pulled out by their head and their neck. And when we use something like forceps or vacuum, that just increases the amount of force pulling on their head and the neck. And we know that babies have very low muscle tone. And that's why, as soon as baby's born, you're told to hold their head and their neck because they're so fragile and they can't hold their head up. But yet, we're pulling with a tremendous amount of power on baby's head and their neck. And then we also see one of the most common things that we see in baby from a musculoskeletal perspective is called infant torticollis, which is when an infant starts to favor one side. And so they'll favor one side and then, we can see some head shape, etc., from that if they can't get that full range of motion. But we see that's directly related to tension in what's called your SCM muscle. And so we have neck tension favoring one side as a primary thing we see in babies. And then we also see difficulty with latch, etc., linked to a decrease or a limited range of motion in their jaw. And obviously that's also correlated with an increase in tethered oral tissues. But the jaw is directly related to neck tension. So we're pulling baby out by their head and their neck. We know that we see that physical sign when they start to favor one side. That's a physical sign of tension. And so we know that physical tension in the birthing process does contribute to overall stress and tension in baby's body. And then the last thing is mental and emotional stress. And that can be maternal stress while baby's in utero. And that's because maternal stress or maternal stress hormone cortisol crosses the placenta. And so baby does experience stress from mom during the prenatal time. And so that's another reason too to help empower moms is, obviously with chiropractic care, we can increase mom's comfort from her physical comfort, but it also helps decrease mental and emotional stress by helping regulate her nervous system and then also keeping her more comfortable. How that directly impacts me, because as we decrease mom's stress, we also decrease baby's stress. And so we look at the mental and emotional stress impact of that as well. And so we have these different things, and then we also have genetics. And we have all of these things, and they come together as this perfect storm where everything's swirling together, and we're trying to understand what is contributing or what's the cause. And the reality is, so many of these different things play an impact. But when you're looking for different options, especially when you have a headache or you have aches and pains, etc., you should feel like you are armed with the research you need to make the decisions you need for your family. And so I'd love to learn more. I'd love to chat more about prenatal chiropractic and the role that chiropractic can play in the prenatal time period. I will link this study and the research in the description below so that you can also take a look and educate and empower yourself on the different roles that acetaminophen may play in the relationship with autism spectrum. And may you feel empowered and equipped to make those choices, your healthcare choices for you and for your family.